Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm going to put you on gallery view so I can see everybody hopping into the room. Welcome, you guys. It's so great to have you here. Welcome to our second Lunch and Learn for 2021. Just as a reminder, each month we're tackling different topics. So today I'm Marnie Norris, Senior VP of Programs for Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration. And we have the honor today of having one of our board members, an incredible advocate and attorney, Georgianna Junco-Kelman. And I'm going to introduce her to you in a minute. But first, we have another incredible woman in our midst, Mikte Mack, who is our interpreter. So if anyone would prefer to have this in Spanish, can you just go ahead and raise your hand? Either digitally or you can raise it in person so we can see you. But if anyone would like it in Spanish, we have that available to us.
Si alguien necesita interpretación en español, por favor déjenos saber en el chat o levantando su mano.
So we'll just take a second and see if we have any requirements for interpretation. And it doesn't look like it. But if you would prefer, Mikte will be here for the entire Lunch and Learn. So all you have to do is put in the chat that you would like to have the interpretation services, and we will go ahead and turn that on for you. Okay.
Si alguien necesita interpretación en español durante el proceso del taller, escribirnos en el chat. Con gusto les haremos la interpretación.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Okay, I'm going to introduce Miss Georgianna Junco-Kelman. Like I said, she has been on our board of directors for many years now. She is the principal and managing attorney at the law offices of Georgianna Junco-Kelman in Studio City. She focuses on the representation of students with special needs. And has worked for many years as an advocate and attorney for families on behalf of children with disabilities. And she joined us last beginning of the pandemic, about a year ago, to talk about the IEP process during the pandemic. And now we're just checking back in to see where are we, what have we learned, and what do we need to be mindful of for the remainder of the school year and into the next one as we transition back to site-based learning. So Georgianna, I'm going to hand it off to you. We are going to be doing questions throughout. This is just a question and answer format. So if you have a question for Georgianna, anything regarding the IEP process, please type it into the chat as we go, okay? Because we'll be calling out your questions and Georgianna will be answering them. So please type your questions in and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to hand it off to Georgianna. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what inspired your work and your advocacy, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much. You know, like in most endeavors in life, and a lot of our endeavors that we pursue are usually inspired by a personal experience, which is what inspired me and motivated me to shift my career into special education law. Is my son Brandon, who is now 18. And as a quick sidebar, as of now, students, individuals with developmental disabilities and serious underlying conditions do qualify for the vaccine. And so if you contact your regional center rep, they will give you your letter and you can go get the vaccine. I got my letter literally 2 days ago and Brandon was vaccinated this morning. He got his first dose this morning. So really important for families to know, contact your regional center reps and you'll be able to get either your dependent adult or your child with the disability or developmental disability and underlying conditions vaccinated. So it's important to know that. And so, you know, that is how I ended up on the path that I am on. Is my son Brandon was born with a brain deformity that led to significant physical, cognitive, developmental disabilities. His official diagnosis is mild global developmental delay, and he's been fully included since the beginning of his education, and he's on an alternate curriculum with a one-to-one aid, but always typically included, always that mainstreaming was extremely crucial for his development. And so, you know, every kid's different. Not everybody qualifies for the same, you know, type of full inclusion program, but that is what was appropriate for him. That is where my fight started, was getting him in the proper placement. And that led me to meet many families that were on a similar road and didn't have the information that they needed, didn't have the bandwidth to fight, because it's an exhausting fight. Long story short, I shifted my career from criminal defense, and it's been now, what, 15, 16 years that I've been doing special education law. And one of my passions is charity work. And I've been on the board of Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration now for, I think, 6, 7 years. And it's my passion, and I love it, and I'm happy to be here. And I know how daunting, how difficult the past year has been for families. I've seen it firsthand. I've had a front row seat to all of the challenges and the struggles and the difficulties. I see how much kids have regressed. And so I'm hoping to guide and provide some information for you moving forward and make maybe this next phase perhaps a little easier. So thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, thank you for giving your time to us and your wisdom and expertise. So we're going to jump right in. So Georgiana, you and I were talking before we went into the event a little bit about last spring. And there was that assessment pause that I think was lifted as of June 2020, somewhere around there, June, July.
Right, it was lifted in, there was, I want to say it was SB 820. And then, you know, there's been several laws that have been passed since March, and state orders.
Hi, Georgiana, we just ended up on mute here. There you go. Perfect.
There you go. Okay, we're good. You can hear me?
We're back. Yes.
I didn't have anything, I promise. So the assessment process was paused, but that was a legally permissible thing to do. You know, when districts do things based on policy or whatever they think is in the interest of, you know, whatever reasoning they have to do it. In this case, it was the pandemic. It's not a simple black and white response. The districts have always had the responsibility to continue to assess students, and they haven't. You know, many have. I know in particular the LAUSD has, I don't think they've, you know, they for a brief pause started the assessment process again. And it took them a long time to start to do that after the permission was provided by the state and the county. And unfortunately, because it took some time to get that going, by the time they finally did, we were back into the surge again. And that again was shut down. Many other districts have been assessing, but unfortunately the LAUSD still has not. And it's just starting again. And what's important for families to know is that they will be owed services that were not provided as a result of a failure to assess, either to identify them initially with an IEP, or a triennial that should have been done, or, you know, issues that came up where the parents requested assessments to determine what to do, what services to provide. There definitely is a very strong argument that the district did not assess, and therefore, as a result of that, students did not receive services, placement, whatever it may be. And so there's definitely an argument that compensatory education is owed. And I would urge parents now to pursue those assessments. If you're still pending, which many are, contact your assistant principals at your schools, who are they're the folks typically in charge of special education, particularly in the LAUSD. Call your assistant principals, find out where the status is. Make sure that you have signed your assessment plan, given them permission to assess. Even if they tell you, here's the assessment plan, we don't know when we're going to be able to assess, but sign the plan. Make sure you sign in consent, because that commits them to that 60-day timeline. Once you sign in consent by law, they must assess within 60 days. So make sure
even during the pandemic.
Even during the pandemic. Absolutely. The districts have a responsibility to provide you with that assessment plan. And what they'll do is they'll provide you with it, and then they'll send you what's called a prior written notice, that letter that says, however, we are not acknowledging the 60-day timeline because of the state closure order, which is not accurate. because everything has pointed, all directives from the US Department of Education to the California Department of Education, everything has been very clear that IDEA still applies. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has always applied, should have always been implemented, and districts should have found a way to assess students. If they were unwilling to have their teachers and their service providers and their psychologists assess students, understandably, so no one can be forced to meet with anyone physically to assess. But there were alternatives that they could have resorted to virtually. They also were highly encouraged to contract out with independent assessors to conduct those assessments. And some districts have done it. The LAUSD for certain has not. And so there's a lot of argument that there are things they should have and could have done that they didn't do, which now makes them liable for compensatory education, reimbursements of family costs, whatever it may be. There's definitely an argument that those things can be pursued in reimbursement moving forward.
Okay. We have Carla Suarez. Glendale and Burbank have outsourced assessments when they didn't have someone to do an assessment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got
They are
you.
two of the districts that I work closely with that I know for a fact have been doing that, and students have continued to be identified and services provided based on new assessment findings.
Okay. And virtual assessments are an option, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a little tricky because particularly the LAUSD's reasoning for not doing virtual assessments is that they feel that the parent has a lot of now flexibility to reject them as appropriate because they were virtual, and then parents can go and ask the district to fund independent ones based on their virtual assessments not being sufficient. But I know that many companies, they changed their publications in terms of their assessments. They adapted them to be able to be valid given in a virtual platform. So, many companies did that with, standardized assessments that were adjusted and deemed to be valid if done virtually according to, following their guidelines in terms of how to do that. And many districts have done that. And some districts have actually, they involve their attorneys and they have the family sign that they are going to be deeming those assessments to be sufficient, and they're not going to then later raise insufficiency, which who knows if that's even valid, because obviously parents can always disagree with assessments and you don't have to really give a reason why. But the effort should have been made, the effort can be made. And sadly, a number of districts chose just to halt assessments altogether, which has been hugely negatively impacting for so many students who just aren't able to get anything that they need because the districts refuse to assess.
Right. Okay. So just snapshot of where we are now. So the assessments are starting back up again for some families. Is there a timeline window? I know it's dependent on when you sign the document authorizing the assessment as mom and dad, and then there's a 60-day window, right? Okay.
There's a yes, once the parent requests an assessment, whether it's a triennial, an initial, whatever it may be, the district must respond within 15 days.
Okay.
Either with a rejection of the assessment and why they don't want to assess in a prior written notice letter, or with the assessment plan for parents' consent. So once the parents sign that in consent, 60 days from that date, the districts must complete assessments, convene an IEP meeting to review assessments and determine what, if anything, needs to be changed or added or in the IEP.
Okay. This may sound like a really silly question, but I know we're already in March. Can that happen over the summer?
It cannot. So that is the exception. And who knows, maybe, because of the pandemic, there's been a lot of sort of flexibility in terms of school going forward in the summer. We're still waiting to hear what's going to happen in the summer. It may be that the school year is extended into the summer, but legally the assessment stops, the timeline stops if there's more than a 5-day break within the 60 days. And so the summertime stops the assessments, and then when school resumes, districts are to complete assessments within 30 days of that time and convene an IEP meeting. But unfortunately, which is why it is crucial for family, we are in March. And so families who require assessments, I would suggest that you contact your assistant principals immediately or your head of special education at your school. Those who have already signed assessment plans, make sure you say, I've already signed my assessment plan back in whenever. When are my assessments to resume? And I expect those to be completed this year, given that, you know, that timeline was triggered long ago, already in violation. And there's still time in the school year to complete. Again, it depends on the district and the logistics and their policies. And, you know, the LAUSD right now, I believe they are starting to assess again, but only on a voluntary basis. So if the school psychologist is willing to meet physically with the student, if the special ed teacher who conducts the academic assessments, the speech and language, the OT, all of these people that conduct the assessments, my understanding thus far is that it is based on a voluntary basis. They cannot be forced to meet physically with the student, and they are not doing virtual assessments. So I suspect there'll still be a backlog on that, because you're not going to have, you know, the same amount of personnel per school probably. And so I would assume now that everyone will be vaccinated, but that's not going to happen until, you know, April sometime. So
Right.
being that a lot of the, you know, the policy is until teachers, which includes obviously special ed teachers, are fully vaccinated, they're not to come back to campus. So I'm assuming that policy is being extended toward physical assessments as well. I don't know. We hear different things every single day. I hear one thing from one assistant principal, I hear one from another. So it's all, you know, right now it's still very fluid and we don't have any really clear responses, but you are for sure to follow up with your, you know, whomever is in charge of special ed at your school. Contact them, email them, create your record, so later you can show that you made all of these attempts to reach out and have your child assessed, which will make a difference in whatever it is you're going to try to pursue later in terms of compensation or reimbursement, either to pursue something you didn't receive, or you were forced to pay out of pocket for something because they didn't do something or didn't assess or whatever it may be. You do have grounds to pursue that, but you've got to make sure you create your record for it.
Got you. That's a great reminder too. Because I know for myself, I mean, we've been just absolutely blessed with our kiddos' IEP process this year, but I forget to, like all the emails I send, I forget to pull them aside and save them, you know, because you're just in the moment of trying to figure out resources in life. And so that's a great reminder.
It's something I always tell parents, you know, I'm always banging the drum. Record every IEP meeting, record every single IEP meeting. You give them notice, written notice within 20 hours, 24 hours of your meeting that you're going to be recording. Obviously the meetings are being done on Zoom. You're completely permitted to audio record. You can't video record. You can audio record on Zoom.
So I have a couple, we're jumping to a different topic, but I now have 2 questions on this topic. And they're all about masks as we transition back to in person, right? So let's take it one question at a time. The first is, can a child not being able to wear a mask continuously due to their condition, i.e. ASD, be an accommodation that parents can ask for in an IEP?
Absolutely. You're going to get pushback. You know, this is sort of, it's a case of first impression, to put it in legal terms. We don't have any precedent or case law that can guide us as to what is and isn't permitted. So I suspect some of this will end up in court on appeal. But legally, a child that has autism, for example, who has sensory integration challenges and is unable to tolerate a mask, that child cannot be kept at home and refused instruction, because that is a direct discrimination against that child. You're forcing that child to do something that child cannot do because of their disability, and you're denying them access to an education physically like other children because of a disability. And so it is tricky, because the argument is going to be, you know, safety of the other children versus this child. And so it is a bit tricky. It's not a simple, you know, it's not a simple response, but my understanding and from what I've seen in the law and you know, the guidelines that have been created is that as long as you have a doctor's note that says the student is unable to tolerate the mask, then you can bring this to your school. I just had this very particular issue with a particular district, and they conceded, yes, as long as there's a doctor note, this child who has severe autism, and you know, and then you make the efforts within the classroom to you know, be distanced from the other students. Everybody else is wearing a mask. The teacher's wearing a mask. Obviously, teachers will be vaccinated, so that, you know, removes a hopefully a high level of fear on that end. And you know, it's been shown now repeatedly, the data shows that children are not highly susceptible. They are not on a high risk level for COVID. They don't tend to contract the disease. They don't tend to be transmittable vectors of the disease. And so all of that kind of, you know, comes into play, that children are such a low risk to themselves and to others. And so the short answer is they cannot force you to stay home because your child cannot wear a mask. And if they do, you know, there are remedies within the law. There's recourse. You can file a complaint with the Department of Education. You can file an Office for Civil Rights complaint based on discrimination. So there, you know, there are outlets that can be pursued. I'm hoping that that won't be a major issue, although I foresee in some areas it will be, particularly because parents will probably be the ones to complain, other parents. And so that remains to be seen, but the short of it is, no, they cannot force your child to stay home because he or she cannot tolerate a mask due to their disability.
There's so many moving parts just in that one issue alone, right?
There's
I
so
mean,
many.
there's
You know,
so
again,
many moving parts.
we don't have a roadmap for this because this is
Right.
all so new. You know, typically we can turn to the law and to existing precedent as to what's okay, what's not okay.
Right.
And here it's going to be, you know, a balancing test, the safety versus the right of a child with a disability to be educated. So that's going to be a balancing test that we don't have the answer to. I can, you know, make my guesstimates as to what an answer should be, but ultimately it would be up to a judge to decide. And it might be on a case-by-case basis. I don't know if there's a standard that's going to be created, but again, I would imagine that because children are such a low risk, that that needs to be factored in.
Well, that answers both of them. So yes, the exemption can be factored into either an IEP that you are forming or one that you're updating, right? So that could be built in as potentially as an accommodation.
That is definitely by definition an accommodation that should be addressed and should be documented in the IEP.
Perfect. Okay, beautiful. Please jump in with more questions in the chat. We would love to hear your perspective, you know, what you're experiencing. So can you take a second, Georgianna, and talk a little bit about the difference and how this is factoring in, because it is a new term. So the recovery services versus compensatory services. Can you just give us a beginner's guide to what that means and what we could expect?
You know, so typically in regular times, I don't know that we'll have regular times ever again. Let's hope.
One can hope.
You know, in non-pandemic times, right? Your child, let's say, receives 2 hours weekly of speech and language services. And for whatever reason, you know, the speech and language pathologist wasn't available, whatever reason, your child, through no fault of your own, did not receive X services for 8 weeks, let's say. And your child was in school and should have been provided those services. That service is automatically recovered. It always has to be made up. Unless the student misses school, that whatever it may be, OT, speech, resource support, whatever it is, has to be made up. And so typically when you have your IEP, they'll tell you, I'm so sorry, our speech pathologist wasn't here for however many days. We're going to allocate, you know, the compensation, the compensatory minutes that you're missing forward. So we're going to tack that on to the IEP. And instead of receiving, I don't know, 2 hours per week, he'll get 2.5 hours per week, whatever, to make up the time lost. That's a foregone conclusion. It's an obligation. They have to do it. And so in the pandemic, particularly in certain districts, from the closure of March to I want to say most of the summer and some of the starting of the new school year, a lot of students did not receive their services. So they didn't receive any of what their IEP services are. Many children didn't. And so theoretically, the district owes those services to those students because it's a violation of the IEP to not provide those services, period, as long as it's not the fault of the student. And so what happened in the fall, many districts, particularly the LAUSD, decided that it was going to be teaching asynchronously, meaning that teachers, service providers did not have to provide that direct service online. And so now what the policy, again, remember this is policy, not law. Those are two very different things. So the argument now is unless we show regression of the student, we are not going to provide you compensatory minutes that you've lost in any services because it wasn't our fault that we couldn't provide services. Well, that's a false argument. Choices were made not to provide services. You know, unions had deals with their districts that teachers were not expected to teach all day, service providers were not expected to provide services as typical, and asynchronous was okay. So many parents got these, like, let's say, packets sent to them and told, work independently all week long. We'll see you in 2 weeks. So we'll check in with you during office hours, Friday from 1 to 2. That is a complete violation of the IEP. And those were choices. And again, this all is going to have to be argued because right now the policy is, unless there's regression and need for recoupment, we're not going to provide back services based on a compensatory model like they typically would if they didn't provide services. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not legal. And parents need to fight back and say, you owe me my speech and language, my OT, my recreational therapy, my, whatever, AT services, physical therapy, whatever wasn't provided, I maintain. Students are owed that time. And parents should fight for that time. And you don't have to prove regression. And what kid hasn't regressed with significant learning needs in an IEP? I think it's a foregone conclusion that the majority of children have absolutely regressed. And on that argument alone, absolutely they're owed their services, but parents don't have, it's not the onus of the parent to prove regression. And I can tell you that a lot of the IEP teams, for obvious reasons, are going to say, oh, he's doing great. I'm not seeing any regression. Therefore, you don't get compensatory education. Wrong. And if they push you back on that, they push back on you on that, file a due process complaint. Because I believe that area is pretty clear. Because again, the proof is in the pudding, right? When school started, they started providing direct services and via, virtually, because clearly students cannot be in school. And then there's also the argument, which gets a little more complicated, is when could have they returned to school? So there has been, particularly with the LAUSD, there have been laws that have passed that have permitted the district to bring back special education students on one-on-one instruction and for their services. Again, the LAUSD has chosen not to do that for their own reasons. The union, we don't need to get into it, but the point is, these are all choices that districts have made when they could have done otherwise. And as a result of their choices, for whatever reason, these students are owed that compensation and the lack of support. The LAUSD right now, as we know, they're negotiating, or I think an agreement has been reached. We still don't have the clear terms of it. But as of now, our understanding is that school will resume sometime in April, at least from K to 6. But K to 6 has been permitted to return for quite some time now. And many districts are back. And the executive orders were lifted. And the LAUSD has chosen, along with the union, for whatever reason, not to permit the students to return yet. Again, these are all choices. And so students are missing out on instruction, on services, as a result of whatever bickering the union and the district are still engaged in. That does not justify a continual violation of a student's IEP. And so there's no question in my mind that students are owed all of that time.
Okay. Yeah, I know there's
not going to be like, you're going to ask for, you're going to get, just brace yourselves. But you have to push back. you have to push back, file your complaints, make your demands, make your record known, and push forward, because you are owed those minutes and that time lost. You absolutely are.
Yeah. Well, and I think as we just noted, there's so many moving parts to this in terms of, just everybody's concerns around the table. I know it's been a long journey. So we have a couple great questions here. Can the schools mandate COVID testing for students returning on campus, particularly special needs or ASD students who may not be able to tolerate the test?
That is a loaded question. And that is more of a medical answer. That is a decision that needs to be made involving a student's medical doctor. If the parent, if for whatever reason a student can't tolerate, kids with autism, good luck sticking, a swab up the nose of a child with severe, processing or sensory disorders.
Right.
I can imagine many parents don't want that. And it isn't reasonable to put their child through that trauma every week. And so the short of it is, no, they cannot force it. Again, it goes back into the argument, many moving parts in the argument, right? And most specifically that children are very low risk. And so why put them through this continually? Especially kids that cannot tolerate all of this probing and sticking and whatever. The COVID test is either the swab up the nose or the prick of blood, and it is a bit invasive, let's be honest. And not every parent is going to want their child, depending on that child's particular needs, to go through that. That can be a traumatic experience, and especially I think the LAUSD saying getting tested, I think I heard twice or daily. I mean, it's crazy. I keep hearing their demands are kids get tested every single day. Well, that's not reasonable. And I do know that the head of the union has said this is non-negotiable unless kids are constantly tested. This isn't going to work. And so again, we still have all of these conflicts, but the short of it is, no, they cannot be forced. Now, what each particular school will do, what principal will do about that, I suspect parents are going to have to fight back and file complaints, and this needs to be litigated. We don't have any clear, we have some answers, but there's nothing clearly particularly to this issue where a decision has been rendered and then appealed, and we have a clear legal precedent for it. We don't have any of that right now, other than what we believe are civil rights and discrimination rights, and what can and can't be forced on a parent and a student. But in terms of the particular facts ever having been litigated, they haven't been. So, I presume this will all come down the pike ultimately, and we'll have clearer answers. But in the immediate future, I suspect there's going to be a lot of conflict, because some parents will say no, and some parents will be told, well, then you can't come to school. And it's going to get a little ugly, I think, before we have a lot of clarification.
Okay. I want to get back to that, because there are policies coming from different directions, and then each school is an individual school community, right? So I do want to get back to that in a second, but we have more questions. We're being told we're going back to school, but only 3 hours a day. Our class is only 8 kids. I've asked why, hold on, I'm so sorry. I've asked why our kids are getting split up. Is there anything we can do to push back on this? I feel the transition will be rough for these kids. I have a concern they won't get enough learning time, then having to travel home and get back on the computer is going to be challenging.
That is a district by district decision. Some districts are having the kids come 5 days a week, all day. And my understanding is the data in California is indicating that children can come to school for longer than once a week or 2 hours a day. But depending on the district, those are decisions that are being made sort of internally by administrators and leadership of that particular district. And if there's a union involved, even more so. And so an immediate response from a parent isn't going to make a difference. Right now it's almost like you get what you get and you don't get upset. That seems to be what the approach is you're getting something, take it or leave it. Parents are opting to stay home, parents can come to school. But the time of, in my opinion, the time that they are allotting isn't sufficient. I don't think that 2 days a week for 2 day, 2 hours, 3 hours a day is reasonable. And I do believe that more can be done. But particular districts are choosing not to. I can tell you that private schools that I know are in school all day, not all day, but 4 to 4 hours a day, every day in California, in Southern California. But unfortunately, there's a lot more in play than just the interest of the student. And that's the sad reality. And there's nothing that can immediately be done about that other than to accept what they're giving you. And, parents can protest, parents can write the schools, you can write your councilmen and women, your representatives in government and the state, but that's not going to give you any immediate response, right? Everything's going to take a little bit of time, and ultimately decisions will be made that need to be litigated because everyone is sort of applying their own standards. There's no uniformity to any of this. And, we're seeing a neighboring district back all day, every day, but yet we're seeing our district 45 minutes away not do the same thing. And so it is very disjointed and there is no uniformity. Unfortunately, there's no simple answer other than you take what you're given now and then push back for more.
Yeah. And in each, in each city, in each area, it's all so different in terms of COVID transmission, the cases, it's all so different.
Which is mind-blowing to me, the return that's being proposed for middle and high school is, I want to say cohorts of 14, although up to 16 are permitted. I think 14 is the number that they chose. And they're going to be in classrooms with noise canceling headphones on, still on Zoom with their teachers in a different room teaching remotely. And I want to say twice a week, maybe. And this is after teachers have already been vaccinated. They're still not going to be in the same room interacting, exchanging with students, and they're giving logistical reasons for it because high school, for example, and middle school kids are rotating throughout the day, and you've got different teachers. And well, that's not that difficult to resolve. I mean, you've had a year to figure it out. It's not that difficult to just have the same group of students, have the teachers rotate into the classroom, but keep the same cohort of students, right? Because obviously in high school, you've got one English class, you've got one math class. Well, you put these kids together and then have the math teacher come in, she leaves, then have the English teacher come in and she leaves. Kids don't have to be all over the place at school, right? So there's ways to do this so kids can have that crucial interaction with their teacher. And kids are done looking at screens, but now we're going to put them in a classroom, which is the only difference. And it is important to the socialization aspect of things, but you want your teacher teaching you in the classroom with that exchange. And now you're still having kids looking at a screen all day, just in a different building other than their house. So that's frustrating for many families who think that's insufficient. And that's one of them.
Well, we have another thought about, let's see, our son has returned to in-person services through LAUSD, one-to-one tutoring and OT with his providers on campus. We do weekly COVID testings on Monday. His COVID test alternative is a spit tube because he can't handle the nasal due to sensory issues.
Right. I didn't know that. I didn't know what the spit tube. That's the first I heard of it. Good.
I wish I had known.
I hate that swab thing. Oh my God. I did that and we did blood as well. So if I known there was a spit thing, I would have been all over that.
I know. Please. Yes, please. And thank you.
Right.
I don't think I had to do deep breathing during the nasal swab. I don't know about anybody else.
Me too.
I was like, okay, just keep breathing.
And I hate the sight of blood, but I actually prefer the blood to the nose thing.
Yes. So we had that same parent responded to LAUSD coffee with principal yesterday, said if LA County goes back into the purple tier after spring break, they will stop hybrid reopenings. So that's again dependent on spikes. And
again, that's policy because that's not county. County has been clear that even in high infection rates, you can still have one-on-one instruction in school. even when we had the highest infection rates, that had never changed. They had always said special education students, the most vulnerable students, were permitted one-on-one small cohort instruction in physical learning. And again, many districts, including the LAUSD, opted not to. So let's hope we're on a downward trend and we stay there. I believe now we are officially in the red tier, which means that students should be back in school physically.
Yeah, well, and hopefully we can all help to keep it in the red tier and moving on down. One concern is that middle and high school students are being offered this advisory room. If they have an IEP, they may need additional behavioral support to help with class transitions. And then most of the general education aides or subs who might be helping with that aren't trained to support that.
Exactly. And so there is another issue is, I don't know yet. We're trying to get as much information as possible because, for example, many of my students have one-to-one aides, and they're going to need that one-to-one aid in that, even in that advisory setup. They're going to need an aide to help in the classroom and to help with transitions, of course. And so I don't know. My understanding is they will be provided their aides as per their IEP. That is my understanding. Until school starts, we're not going to have a clear idea of how this is going to work, right? But there is an argument that these aides aren't properly trained for this. And in that case, you have to convene an IEP meeting and discuss it and voice your concern and make your request that, you perhaps want a non-public agency one-to-one aide who may have better training in order to handle this. But that's going to be a challenge because, the districts are always going to say our aides are properly trained. So, the onus is on the parent to show that the support that's being provided to them isn't appropriate or isn't sufficient. And so my bigger concern is, are they going to allow the aides? Because if they're saying that teachers can't be in the same classroom, why would an aide be allowed to be in the class? I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm hoping that students will be provided their aides. My understanding is that that's what's going to happen. Until school starts, I won't know. So never mind the argument of, that's a secondary argument, is whether the aid is appropriate. The first question that has to be reached is, are they even going to provide aids for these students that need the aids regardless? And so, but yeah, if you're dissatisfied and you don't think the aid is qualified, you're going to have to call an IEP meeting and make that complaint known and talk about what can be done about it.
So just a reminder, everybody, we have about 10 more minutes. So any questions, any other thoughts, please pop them in the chat. We had one parent who said that her daughter did the cheek swab test and did just fine. So
Right.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are a few options out there.
Good.
And it doesn't sound like we even really know at what rate kids are going to be expected to test, but it sounds like once a week is probably a good bet, right?
Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, there's from one parent, I'm hearing that the vaccine is being tested on kids now. It may be required before kids return to school in the fall. Can the COVID vaccine be mandated for all kids like mumps, measles, rubella vaccines? That's a little outside of our scope of. It's
going to be a fight. That's going to be the next big fight, right? It has been, it was stated and then it was walked back. Superintendent Buettner did say several months back that once the vaccine is approved for children, that it will be mandatory in order for kids to enroll in school, just like the mumps, measles, rubella, or the other vaccines. It's going to be a fight because we know a lot about those vaccines, right? Those took years to develop. We've got a ton of data. And while the science is showing the vaccine is safe, I've been vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. My son, who's 18, has been as well. And my 16-year-old, because he qualifies since he's in our home, he's going to be taking it as well. So it's going to be a personal choice by parents. I don't believe it should be forced on parents. I understand the trepidation in not knowing enough about this vaccine because it did go to market very quickly. It was developed in record time under very, strenuous political climates. And so I can understand that hesitation. And I think the bigger argument is going to be that children are not, you know, they're not at high risk. They're not carriers of this, and you know, high risk infections occur because of children. That's not the case. So all of these factors are going to come into play, and ultimately it will be something that likely has to be litigated. But in the, you know, unless there's an injunction filed where schools are told they can't force it upon children, not have them come to school. But I suspect that fight is coming. I suspect it will be made a mandatory policy. And so parents need to brace themselves that this is probably coming. It was walked back after it was certainly stated this will happen, because there was such a backlash, but it remains to be seen. But I suspect it's going to be a big controversial challenge.
One parent offered up that because it's considered experimental medication, for being under a year, it can't be mandated yet.
Right,
At least not in her child's district, nor with the union for the
and again,
teachers.
that's a little bit out of our scope.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can only tell you what I have heard is the ultimate plan is to make it mandatory after all of those sort of, you know, elements have been met as to when it can be or not be. But you know, I think it's going to be a fight.
Yeah.
That's coming.
So that's further down the road. With our few remaining minutes, and please, again, pop your questions into the chat. It's March, June is coming. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, because everybody's still working out the details. Is there anything, Georgianna, that comes to your mind that you really want to have parents think about in the next few months while we are beginning to wrap up the current school year, or as we're heading into the next school year?
I would say have your annual IEP meeting. You know, unfortunately, a lot of parents have been told we're not doing meetings right now, or we're going to do it late, or we don't have to do it, or whatever. Make sure you have your IEP meetings before the year is over, and you document needs and concerns and make your requests for what you may need moving forward, and make it clear on your record that your student didn't receive X, Y, and Z services, and so you're owed that. And record your meeting when you do so, because a lot of families have missed exorbitant amount of support since March. Kids have regressed significantly, and you're gonna have to try and build up those lost skills. And the way to do that is with intervention and intensive services moving forward. And it may be that what your IEP currently says isn't enough. It likely isn't enough. And so have those meetings, make your record clear, ask for more help, ask for whatever hasn't been given to you. And, you know, there is a recourse. If they're not responding to you, you file your due process complaints, and you go and you plead your case to a judge. You have that right. You know, it's like I said, there's no easy answer here. There's no magical thing that's going to happen that's going to make everything better. Many of our kids have lost so many skills that are just not going to be recouped. And sadly, a lot of kids are they're going to struggle for a long time, and some of it is irreparable. It's awful, but let's remain hopeful and moving forward, get all the help that your child needs to try and again build them up and set them up for success moving forward, because it's a long road ahead, and there's a big gap that we need to fill that they've lost.
Oh, okay. Hang on. We have a few last minute questions here. Hold on one second. My apologies. And because I did also want to talk a little bit about documenting regression. Are aids supposed to be requested through IEPs? Yeah. So any kind of aid support, one-on-one support, does that get requested through the IEP process?
Yes, they will not give it to you any other way. And know that most districts, particularly the LAUSD, if you're requesting the support of a behavioral aid for whatever, which is what they term them, is either, you know, they tend to tell you the only reason that your child would be assigned an aid is if they have certain behaviors, whether it's elopement or self-injury or, injury to others. And that's not entirely true at all. If your child has significant attention focus issues and can't attend to the classroom, a behavioral aid may be appropriate for that child. And so ultimately, when you ask for an aid in an IEP meeting, they will always tell you, we can't give you an aid unless we do a functional behavioral assessment. I always push back on that because it isn't true. If the IEP team deems the aid necessary now, and there's enough data collected that shows it, they absolutely are empowered to grant you that aid. They will always tell you, no, that is not true. They will tell you, until we conduct this assessment, which has happened with so many families are asking for support, right? Even right now, they want any help they can get one-on-one on Zoom even. And they're coming back with, well, we have to do an FBA, the functional behavioral assessment. Until that is done, we can't determine whether or not your child needs an aid. For many reasons, that's false, but nonetheless, that is the process that they're going to tell you. And so, unfortunately now, because the LAUSD hasn't been assessing, they just tell you, sorry, we can't give you an aid and we can't assess. So you just are in this holding pattern. Document all of those things that you've requested this support. But yes, the aid is only granted via an IEP. And once it is granted, it is documented in your IEP that your child has, a 6 hour day or whatever it is that you determine an aid to support him all day, and or him or her. And then you're going to have goals that address behavior, whatever it is that aid is there to support. But getting a one-to-one aid is a fight. They always try to push back and not and find other ways to support the student. But some kids need that one-to-one aid, and parents really have to push back for it. And don't just succumb to, well, we can't until we give you an FBA. Make the record clear that enough evidence is there, and ask your teacher directly, do you think my child needs an aid? And teachers hopefully tend to answer, yeah, on his own, I can't support him. And that usually, hopefully, is enough, or at the very least, for you to file a due process complaint and say that you need the aid that wasn't given to you when the evidence showed otherwise.
Thank you. So I'm starting to receive a lot of thank yous in the chat box, Georgiana. Thank you so much.
I could be here honestly all day. There's so much that I always want to just get out there, and I want to empower families, and I want them to primarily don't just take no for an answer. Don't just take we don't do that. That's not done. Those are your key phrases to tell you that it's not true, and they're not representing to you what can be done. So don't just accept no. Your child has an individualized education plan, emphasis on individualized. Every plan is different. Much can be done. It is very flexible. The law allows a lot of flexibilities for these IEP teams to create IEPs according to what the child needs. You don't need an FBA for them to grant you an aid. If the evidence is there, if teachers are saying he, absolutely needs an aid, make that very clear that they have the power to give you that aid. And at the very least, if they refuse, make that record super clear, and then file a due process complaint. And the judge is going, whether you have a lawyer or not, I highly advise having one. I wish I could tell you otherwise. But just have your facts clear, and you go plead that to a judge. If you go to mediation and they refuse there, go in front of a judge. It's not easy to do. It's an intimidating process, but you simply as a parent go in front of a judge and say, these are the facts. This is what I asked for. This is what I know to be true. This is why they said no. And hopefully a reasonable magistrate and, an administrative law judge will say, you're right. Let me give you what you need. That's the short of a very complicated process, but ultimately you do have that recourse that you can go down that road, and don't stop pushing until you get what your child needs. And at the end of the day, please know that attorneys can take your cases to due process without charging you. Parents are so scared to reach out to lawyers for help because they don't know that those fees are reimbursable, and most attorneys will take your case to due process, and a large chunk of that cost will be negotiated with the district, so parents don't have to pay it. So don't be afraid to reach out to an attorney to get help, and you keep banging your head against the wall, and you know that you've done all you can. It's exasperating, it's anxiety ridden, and your child continues to devolve. Go find help, and I promise you somebody will help you.
Thank you, Georgiana, so much. So you all know, we have, I'm so sorry we're out of time. I wish we could get to all the questions. We have put in the chat a resource document that includes Georgiana's website. Okay.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, and then it also includes our upcoming Fun for All events. So for inclusion, interaction, singing, story time, all those activities, please join us. We'll be continuing those throughout the school year. And then our upcoming My Virtual Play Club on April 24th. That's on a Saturday. And then just a quick plug in case, I don't know about you guys, but as a grown-up, having a night where I can be with other adults is really nice. I'm sorely lacking right now as we quietly shut the doors sometimes to our rooms. So this Friday night, we have celebrity bingo. It's a wonderful night on Zoom. It's a great way to play bingo, to laugh, to just have an hour of fun. And it raises funds for Inclusion Matters for our programming, like today's programming, like our Lunch and Learns and our Fun for Alls. So that's all in a resource document in the chat box. So hopefully you can join us for a little levity this Friday night. Georgiana, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Anytime.
I really appreciate this time. And everybody keep breathing. We will be back in person. We really will. It's going to happen.
Think this time next year. Think that. Like hopefully by this time next year, we would have all hopefully gotten through the worst of this and be a little bit more stable, more especially our children.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you everybody for being with us. We'll be back next month. We're going to be focusing on mental health and the transition, supporting children as they transition from virtual to site-based learning. So we'll be tackling mental health challenges next month.
Okay.
All right, you guys. Georgiana,
Everybody, thank you.
Take good care, everyone.